Good afternoon. This is Eric Mucklow, and welcome to another session of the Sustainability and Energy webinar series, sponsored by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This webinar is being recorded, and it'll be available in our Sustainability and Energy website channel. There are web links on the right to view past webinars, as well as this one that comes up. There's a block that says web links that you'll see on the right there. A copy of this presentation. PowerPoint is also under the I'll share a block below that. To earn AIA credits, if you're interested in earning those learning units or half of a CEU, you can download a quiz from the Sustainability and Energy website. The link is now on the screen. The quizzes will be posted within a week of the last presentation in a group. We do them in groups of 5. And then once you send in your quizzes, presumably with the right answers, to the website on the screen, we will see that credit is entered under your AIA number, if you are sure to include it. Basically today we will be talking about the Green Building Information Gateway, GBIG for short. It's a global platform to understand the attributes and performance of buildings around the world. GBIG provides project transparency, market context, and rich multi-source asset timelines. This webinar will provide an introduction to GBIG and instructions on key features. Participants will have the opportunity to learn about search strategies, data sorting, maps, reports, and export options. We will have a question and answer session at the end. When the time comes, I'll open up a text entry box for questions. Our presenter today is Dr. Chris Pyke with assistance from Sean McMahon. Dr. Pyke is the Vice President of Research for the U.S. Green Building Council. They're the people that originated the LEED accreditation process. He directs the development of the Green Building Information Gateway. It's what we are talking about today, and he's also a faculty member at George Washington University here in Washington, D.C., teaching the Graduate Sustainable Urban Planning program. With that, I'll flip it over to Dr. Pyke's presentation and
Great. Hey, thank you very much. Can you guys hear me well enough? Great. All right. So it's a pleasure to talk with you this afternoon about the Green Building Information Gateway. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to give you guys an introduction to what GBIG is today. And by the end of the session, we'll talk a little bit about where GBIG is going. So I'm going to give you an outline for this webinar. We're going to talk about GBIG in 4 parts. First, we're going to talk about the underlying motivation for the platform. What problem are we trying to solve, and what is our goal in developing this platform? Second, I'm going to introduce GBIG by way of a data story. I'm going to talk to you about another issue and by analogy, set the stage for what we're trying to do with GBIG. Then I'll return to GBIG itself and talk about the actual core story that we're playing out in this piece of software. And finally, I'll give you a fair degree of detail on some of GBIG's features that you may find yourself, that may create some new opportunities for you on a daily basis. So first, let's focus on motivation. So as with everything that we do at USGBC, our work is grounded in the idea of market transformation. And the most elemental part of market transformation is that in any given market, be it office or border crossings or schools, there is a distribution of performance for built environments. And at least for the last decade, we've been carrying around a curve that looked like this one. And largely it's a concept. There's actually very little data to substantiate it. So you can think of it as a theory of change. The idea is that by defining the characteristics of market leaders, we could then recognize and provide opportunities for differentiation such that the market would shift to reward and recognize those market leaders. And of course, we recognize that those are leaders relative to normal building practices and a small minority of folks who are either bleeding edge innovators who are taking their own risks and doing amazing things, or conversely, those folks who may be on the very edge of what may be legal or legitimate. And so our goal with GBIG as a platform is to move from accelerating the market by handing out glass plaques or the equivalent to creating an information platform that allows folks to understand where they are on this curve and to accelerate that process of recognition and differentiation. And so let me start by talking about a little bit about how GBIG is different by talking about a data story, the one I mentioned at the beginning. And to do this, I'm going to take us out to the scale of the entire United States. And so in the case of the US, we talk about a population of 320 million Americans. And so we can understand those through the census, and here's a map of where they are. If I look at there is one way to gauge one dimension of performance for Americans can be gauged by the 15 million folks who show up to run a road race. So if I want to ask how fast are Americans, I don't have any direct way to sample 320 million Americans. I know they're out there, but I don't know anything about how fast they run. For 15 million Americans in 2014, I do know something. I know that they showed up somewhere, somehow, for a road race. And we call these folks the ones who are literally and figuratively in the running. And so beyond just being in the running, that 15 million people who showed up, I can say something much more specific about folks who show up to run a particular race on a particular day. So in this case, this picture is for Boston, Massachusetts in April of 2014. This is the Boston Marathon. And on this particular day, 31,805 competitors showed up to run 26.2 miles on a particular day on a particular course in Boston. They didn't just run, they ran a particular race on a particular day, and they were timed and so forth. The first wave, this race wasn't just all one mass, all 31,000 were not equal. The first wave of elite runners are called out differently and recognized, and ultimately those 30,000 runners boil down to one winner. And I want to look at this from the point of view of market transformation a little bit. And what do we know about this winner? There's three things I want you to take home about it. One is we have transparency. I know that this guy, the winner of the race, Meb Keflezighi, he ran 26.2 miles on that day, in that place, in a time of 2 hours and 8 minutes and 36 seconds. That's fast. However, what makes him a winner is not his time, it's his context. He was the first person in a field of 31,805 people to cross the finish line. So Meb is great because Meb ran a really fast time, and on this day and in this spot, it was sufficient to beat all 31,000 competitors. Moreover, the other reason I know he's great is because I can reconstruct a competitive timeline about his career and look backwards in time and say that winning the Boston Marathon on this particular day in April was just one of a number of amazing things that he has done over the course of his career. He won the U.S. Olympic trial. He won the New York Marathon. He won an Olympic silver medal, and his track record goes back to 1997 and beyond. And so what I take from this is that I have a degree of transparency, context, and a timeline of exceptional performance that tells me that Meb is a great runner under superior management. All right, with that story in hand, I want to talk to you about buildings, which is, I think, why we're on the line today, and see if we can do something analogous with something maybe a little less common. And so when it comes to buildings, just like we did with all the people in the US, we understand that there's a lot of buildings out there. Across the world, there are probably on the order of 45 million commercial buildings, well over 1 billion homes, and we can see them here. I can see them through the nighttime lights of the world, but I really don't know much about them. So in other words, I have that gap between the 320 million Americans and the 15 million that show up to run a race. When we talk about the folks who are in the running, one of our goals with GBIG is to light up more of those millions and billions of dwelling units and say, who's in the running? Who do I know anything about? Just did you show up? And in the case of GBIG Today, we track roughly 1 million buildings in GBIG, and we track them all around the world in a set that is growing day by day. And as was mentioned earlier, my colleague Sean McMahon is here, and that's as part of his role in the team is to help us grow this universe of buildings. So again, we don't know a lot about these million buildings. These are just like the people who show up to run a race. We just know, we know they're out there, we know that they towed the line, we know that they're doing something. Of that million buildings, there are different races that are in there, and one of those is LEED, along with hundreds of others. And in this case, as of a couple of months ago, we had 59,217 LEED projects that we track out there around the world. So that's one way of understanding how we know a building's in the running, and we know something about it because we know the race it's running. In the case, we can boil that down to a single building, in this case, our headquarters. This is a building we call 2101 L Street in Washington, D.C., probably not far from you guys. And through GBIG, we can use information from multiple sources to provide something analogous to what we understand about Meb and his success in Boston. First, we can take data from a number of sources and understand something about the transparency. What is this building doing with respect to energy? In this case, we know that in 2013, it, as one of a number of observations, had a source energy intensity of 229 kBTU per square foot. We know that with respect to the amount of green building activity, something I'll show you in a second, it is the 10th in Washington, D.C. And we are aware of this building through 17 green building activities since 2006. That's its timeline. So taken together, similar to how we did with Meb, we can conclude that 2101 L Street is a great asset under superior management. So let's break this down and go a little deeper into the features that GBIG has that allow us to look at individual real estate assets, both assets that are under consideration and assets that exist in the real world. And so everything I'm going to show you in the next few minutes is available for free, publicly facing, in the website called gbig.org, gbig.org. You can click into your browser now and follow along if you'd like, or you can just keep watching. So first, I'm going to show you 4 different things that GBIG does. And our overarching goal is to provide a platform to explore the attributes and performance of buildings across the spectrum of green, recognizing that in that nighttime lights of the world, just like in our 15 million runners, there are all shades of green. And our goal is to be able to dip into those shades of green and provide some information about what's going on. So I'm going to share with you 4 things. 1, project transparency, market context, integrated timelines, and data-driven insights. So in the next 10 minutes, I hope that those things will mean a little bit more to you. So first off, I want to talk about content, just to give you a real concrete sense of what's in here. GBIG, although gbig.org is a product of the U.S. Green Building Council, it goes far beyond LEED. It contains thousands of certified projects, including LEED, Energy Star, and many more. It includes hundreds of case studies from dozens of sources. It includes thousands of buildings that have revealed their energy, water, and other dimensions of performance through municipal benchmarking and other sources. And it includes hundreds of insights from over 50 authors and growing. So I just want to start by giving you a sense of, when you go to gbig.org, what are you finding? You're certainly finding a place to learn more about LEED projects, but it's a lot more than that. And we'll come back to that. So first, transparency. Transparency, when we talk about transparency, we mean it's the most fundamental thing we can do in the platform. Because fundamentally, when we talk about market transformation, we want to go back to that curve. And the reason that curve is important is that the root of green building is market failure. And the root of that failure is the lack of information about where buildings are on that curve and what they represent. And so our fundamental goal is to overcome that by basically saying, what are projects achieving and what makes it green? So if you go to GBIG and you type in US GBC headquarters, one of the things you'll find will be this project. This is our LEED Commercial Interior 2000 Platinum headquarters. And the critical issue that GBIG tries to convey is not just that project exists, although that's important, it tries to put into English what makes that project green. So a user in GBIG can click down on these tabs under why it's green and learn a little bit in English about the water efficiency, energy efficiency, materials, indoor environmental quality, and by diving into the dashboards, they can look at individual credits that were achieved by this project. They can also look at comparable areas that by things like owner, office, or the statistical area, look at other populations. So what we can do is we can unpack the certification that is for USGBC headquarters and look at its components. In other words, for some of you, that just to kind of remind you, we understand that LEED is essentially a yardstick, just like the Boston Marathon. LEED doesn't predetermine an outcome. Basically, LEED is a race. And so depending on how well you do, we can break down that performance and say, what was your pace per mile? How did you run that hill? These kind of details. The second part is just like those marathon runners. It's not enough just to know the facts. The facts alone, the facts in terms of transparency, like Meb ran 2 hours and 8 minutes for a marathon. That's really good to know. However, the issue is what is the context? What is going on in Washington, D.C.? What is going on in the office market? What is going on in the statistical area? How good is this building for its market? Which matters, the relative context matters a lot. And so the platform is designed to help you do that. So if we drill down further into USGBC headquarters, I can find one of these LEED dashboards, and I can start to find histograms or density plots illustrating the achievement of this project relative to its peers. And what you'll see in this case, I'm looking at the achievement of in this case, LEED points for indoor environmental quality, and I see a distribution of achievement. Almost every project achieves something, and the average project achieves a little more than 8 points. This one achieves 13 out of 17 possible. Nobody achieves the full 18. So where does this project stand? It's in the top 7% of projects in the US, top 30% in Washington, D.C., which has excellent projects, and down below I can see exactly what it did to achieve that. So in other words, I can put its achievement into context, and I can know that this is a great project, top 10% in the entire United States. I can also say that it's great, but not exceptional for Washington, D.C. This is the kind of context I need to understand, hey, can I ask more from my design team? Am I getting the best in class? Or maybe there's some lessons I can learn from the 30% of projects in DC that are doing more than this one has. Third, and probably the most innovative and important part of GBIG, is that we also recognize we're at a moment in time where green building is moving from being an event, a single event, like I certified a new construction or I earned an Energy Star plaque, to a way of managing an asset over time. Green is a status more than an event. And so one way we can look at that, and maybe this is a new concept, is by taking a single asset and looking what a green building looks like today. So again, to kind of underscore this, a green building, it starts with an effort to design and build a better building. But that alone is not sufficient today to be a green building. Let me focus as an example on 1 Potomac Yard down in Arlington in Crystal City. And so as an example, let's look at the timeline for 1 Potomac Yard. If you can see on your screen, our timeline for 1 Potomac Yard goes back to 2004. And now what I want to show you is a blending of 2 sources of evidence sustained over 10 years to begin answering the question of why is this a high-performance building. Our experience, our data on this 1 Potomac Yard office building, which is occupied by the US EPA, goes back to 2004, when this building registered for LEED NC 2.1. That's the race it was choosing to run at that time. The building finished and certified 2 years later as an NC 2.1 Gold, and then a year later it earned and disclosed its first Energy Star label. It then registered for LEED for existing buildings, and a year later it earned its LEED EB 2.0 certification, and then it continued for a number of years to earn and disclose Energy Star labels. Until this year, in January of 2014, it recertified with LEED and earned a Platinum existing building certification. So what I have is a multi-source timeline of information that illustrates that this building was built green, operated green, and continued to improve over a 10-year period. And if I turn that into a plot, I can see that the blue line is the sequence of Energy Star disclosures that this building has made, reaching currently a high of 91 in 2012. And you can see the orange line represents the broader market of office buildings in Virginia. Again, what does this tell me? This timeline, this rich, multi-source timeline of information shows me that this is a superior asset under good management that is sustained over time. This is what a green building looks like today, and this is the kind of information you can find in GBIG. Ultimately, however, data is not enough. What we do with data is create a platform for professional interpretation and analysis. And so one of the most important parts of GBIG is the Insight technical blog. And this is insight.gbig.org. And what you'll find on the Insight blog is a chance for people to offer their first-person interpretation of things that are going on in the green building industry, and with reference to specific projects or groups of projects. So, for instance, if you go to Insight today, you'll see. Oh, actually, it's changed this morning, but a couple days ago, you will find news on green bonds, which is an important way of financing capital, debt capital for real estate. You'll also see a variety of things ranging campuses to chemical and supply chain hazards. And right now there's a group of almost 50 authors who are contributing a myriad of content. And that's open to many of the folks on the phone today if you have things to share. And to give you another example of more technical content, this is a place where we can look at, say, energy efficiency design goals. In this case, one of the most frequent questions we get is, how do I understand how good or how aggressive a specific energy efficiency design goal might be for LEED for new construction? In this particular example, this author, Maya, she created a bit of analysis for the achievement of LEED NC 2009 projects, and she created a graph illustrating the difference between the lowest and best achieving buildings with regard to energy efficiency design goals, and she separated it by different space types: commercial, education, healthcare, hospitality, and so forth. And so this is a great spot to share these kinds of insights with the community, where we can begin to ask, we can, again, through transparency and through these professional insights, help projects understand how good they are, and by extension, help them strive to be better. Because I bet that no one out there intends to, or at least desires to, create a below average project, and in each project they're doing, they're probably aspiring to do more than that. This tells you where that bar is at any point in time. So to kind of reach a little bit of a conclusion and open this up to a few questions, today I want to leave you with two sites. Where is GBIG today? Today, GBIG is a global platform to understand the attributes and performance of buildings around the world. Sometimes we understand very little. We understand that the building exists. We understand it may be owned by someone like GSA or maybe another Corps of Engineers client or something like that. But our ambition is to create a scaffolding where we can hang that information. Where we can, we create tools that provide project transparency. Why is a project green? Ideally answering that question in simple English. How do we put that level of performance into context? How good is it? And then critically, to stitch those sources of information together over time, and to create a rich multi-source timeline of asset information. Finally, it's critical that data is the foundation for interpretation and analysis. The data is the beginning of the interpretation and analysis frame. Moving forward, I want to leave you with three opportunities. First, today, GBIG places a heavy emphasis on why is that building green. That is absolutely essential, and we've devoted a lot of time, and we will continue to devote a lot of time to that. At the same time, we want to use that information to create opportunities to recognize the individuals and organizations that made it that way. So we're going to be rolling out tools in the near future to help connect individuals and organizations to the projects that they worked on. So in other words, when we see a great asset like One Potomac Yard, we want to be able to provide some call out for the HIT contracting group that made it that way, that brought it out of the ground. That's the kind of thing we want to do. Finally, two last things. We are very open to partnership and contributions in the case of any time when we can do an exchange of data to help people understand the market better and perhaps draw in exemplary examples of performance or technology applications. We're always on the lookout to do that. And I can assure you that much more is to come with the GBIG platform over the coming year. So finally, I want to leave you with three quick ways to get to learn more. So first, I would absolutely encourage you to explore gbig.org. And it starts with just typing in search terms. And so type in Washington, D.C. or Peoria and see what you find. And there may be information in there that you could add or that you might want to give us some feedback over how it's presented. Second, you can follow us on, you can follow the Twitter feed on Chris Pyke is my Twitter handle there. And what we do is we post all updates to Insight on there so that you can keep a real-time tabs of what folks are communicating about. Several times a week we post new content. Or of course you can reach out to me by email. So with that, I think it's a good moment to try to address any specific questions that you may have over text.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I opened up the Q&A block on the right-hand side of the screen. At the very bottom of it, you'll see a text entry box. Type your questions into there and send them. They will not show up in the column above except to me because I'm special. No. But I'll read them, consolidate multiple questions that are redundant and that kind of thing, and try to read them for the sake of the recording, and so that Dr. Pyke can answer them one at a time. So I'll await anybody putting in their questions in that box and see what we can come up with. Looks like a very good tool to have available. I want to go in and put in my house and see what's in my neighborhood as soon as we get off the phone here. But it looks like an interesting thing to use. I don't see any questions coming in yet.
So
yes.
Yeah. One thing that I can prompt, as we're waiting for some questions to roll in, me elaborate on a couple of different ways that you can use GBIG today. So if you go into GBIG and you type in a location or a search term, it'll pop you up with a place page. So if you live in, say, like I do in Alexandria, Virginia, you can find a place page that provides a summary statistics of the green building activity in Alexandria. That's something I didn't have a chance to show you a screenshot of that particular functionality, but that's something that's a basic feature, along with a rank list of the highest achieving buildings in Alexandria. So when you type in Alexandria, Virginia, it gives you back both a place page as well as a set of buildings in Alexandria that have the greatest amount of green building activity. So I think so for folks who want an easy place to start, they can start by just dropping in a place name and seeing what comes up.
Okay, and I noticed that you had many more buildings in this database than are registered or that are certified with LEED. What data sources were accessed and keeps this thing going?
So right now thanks, that's a great question. So today there are roughly 450 types of green buildings out there. And so a big part of our effort, and this is why we call ourselves the Green Building Information Gateway, is that we really don't have a mode of creating new content. But our feeling is that information about green building activity is incredibly diffuse and actually ephemeral out there on the internet. So there are lots of case studies and lots of certifications, many of which have not been consolidated. They have not been linked together to tell us about individual assets, and particularly in an era where both for federal agencies and municipal government, there's increasing emphasis on annual disclosure of both enterprise-wide and municipal energy performance and so forth. Our goal is to link those data sources through time. So if you look in GBIG today, you'll find, of course, all of LEED. That makes sense. As well as every night we update Energy Star, and then there are literally hundreds of other varieties of rating systems, case studies, disclosures. And so examples would be the Washington, D.C. municipal benchmarking, New York City, Boston, San Francisco, all have individual energy benchmarking programs. We have, I believe, something on the order of 1,500 discrete case studies for which are linked in here. We have information for certain buildings from McGraw-Hill's Dodge construction information. That's a relatively limited set of buildings. We also have thousands of buildings that have taken part in USA EPA energy competitions, which also provide public disclosure of energy use intensity, both site and source, over time. And we have a variety of other information types from around the world. So for instance, BREEAM buildings that are both in the US and outside. We have buildings in Germany and all around the world. So there's what you'll find, you may be surprised at the breadth of green building activity, but that's actually exactly the point.
Oh, that's great. Now, Paul from NSTC asks, how is this tool being advertised to real estate developers, realtors, etc.? These groups are central to advancing the marketability of green technologies.
That's a great thing. I appreciate the question. So the issue, so this tool is absolutely trying to inform the real estate developer community as well as the broker and investor community. And I'll talk to you most specifically about the investor community, because the investors are really beginning to drive the show. Folks want to understand what makes an asset, what constitutes a green asset. And a green building certification is a part of that. It's third-party verification that a building has certain attributes. And beyond that, there is a notion that that what constitutes a green building. So this, the example of One Potomac Yard I gave you, we were in a number of conversations with both debt and equity investors who want this kind of information to understand the holdings of groups like real estate investment trusts, folks who issue corporate commercial lenders, and they want this kind. They're asking for this kind of information to inform their investment and their underwriting decisions. And so I think we've had the best luck to date of making this information available to folks like pension funds and others, and real estate investment trusts and others who are using this information to communicate with their investors. We also understand that for certain groups, this information has been used by real estate brokers, and so they're using this tool to help understand. For instance, a common question we get is, my client is interested in building a commercial interior in city X. They want to know whether they can make a case to go from silver to gold or gold to platinum or so forth. And this platform can give a look at certification trends in a place so that it can help build the case that the market is, or maybe isn't, moving toward higher levels of certification. At the same time, it's also possible to use GBIG, now this is a little bit more advanced, but to use the tool to find buildings that have specific characteristics. And so it is possible to go into GBIG and to identify properties that may be bright, daylit, access to transit, those kinds of things. So those are functions that may complement existing tools in the brokerage community. So that's kind of a windy answer, but I would definitely say that to kind of put a bow around it, this kind of information is actually being demanded by the debt and equity investment community. It's beginning to be used by project teams who are working to put the projects that they're planning into context. And at times, it's being used as a tool to explore the green building landscape and to help contextualize assets that brokers may be offering to customers.
Okay, we have another question. I think probably because this looks like a very powerful tool for free to the user. So how is GBIG funded?
So GBIG is funded by the U.S. Green Building Council. So it is a free tool to the public, and one of the reasons that this tool in its current form is free is that one of USGBC's missions is to promote more efficient and effective markets and to make information about green buildings more readily accessible. So this is a mission-funded activity of the U.S. Green Building Council, and one of the basic reasons that GBIG has existed over the last couple of years is that essentially there's a recognition that along with the inherent flexibility that comes with a rating system like LEED, a core part of LEED is flexibility. At the same time, flexibility creates an obligation to explain how folks took advantage of that flexibility. What did they do to make their project green using LEED as a yardstick in a vocabulary? And so that's one of the reasons that this tool really, we felt like it needed to exist, because the market needed to have transparency about the breadth and scope of green building. And we needed to be able to answer that fundamental question of that project is that the fact that it went for LEED, it provides a yardstick and a language to talk about why it's green, and this helps an end user understand that information. And just to kind of be didactic about it a little bit, that's one of the reasons that that putting basic information about project achievement out there is so important, because it basically, a project that may be built green and done green, if it doesn't share that story, it's really not contributing very much to market transformation. It's not showing its leadership in a way that the market can identify and follow. So we view this kind of transparency as one of the most fundamental and important parts of the green, and we often don't talk about it that way. But putting out that information on why a project's green, what have you done here, is in and of itself an act of leadership, and this is the portal to that information.
Okay, well, while we're looking for any more questions coming in, I put a link down there in the web links box. Just click on the Green Building Info Gateway bar there and hit Browse To, and it should open up another window, hopefully not this one, so that people can go in and start playing with your tool. And now, if of course I get in there, I'll probably break it, but that shouldn't be possible, right? I imagine. So, but
no, it's incredibly break-proof. It's break-proof. No.
like anything on the internet, I'm sure there's many people trying. So, okay. So again, we have the past webinars link up there, and our Mercy site, the new sustainability and energy site, as well as email us link. And Dr. Pyke had previously put his email address up there. Not seeing any more questions in. I want to thank Dr. Pyke and Sean McMahon for his and their time giving this information to us. It looks like a wonderful tool that I have not been aware of previously. The gathering data from multiple sources out there can be a good market study, without being too narrow in scope. So that looks like a thing that we can possibly use. We do have one more question that's come in from Melissa. Although quote, why it's green, quote, is listed, or will there be any information on cost savings as a result of building green projects?
Oh, that's a great question. So there's as I mentioned earlier, there's a bunch of data aggregation in there, and so let me mention 3 resources that are in GBIG to talk about cost savings specifically. One is there is a set of information in there called GB data, which is actually the 140 some projects underlying Greg Katz's previous work on the marginal costs of green building, and so that the data on those projects actually have examples of the marginal cost that was experienced for green. This is a couple of years ago. We also have some write-up information from work we did for the National Academy of Science, looking at the cost of green for DoD facilities. And if you're not familiar with that, that was a study from last year where the National Academy of Science analyzed the green building practices for the Department of Defense and found that green building, both through LEED and ASHRAE 189 ASHRAE 90.1 was highly cost effective given the sort of financial terms for the DoD based on OMB guidelines. And so we have some write-up about that. We also have a compendium from our senior research fellow Dan Winters looking at the entire literature on the costs and benefits of green building. So in the case of individual projects are not systematically linked to payback information. In part, that's just not part of it's not part of the standard certification information. Although with one exception, there are particular credits such as Energy and Atmosphere Credit 1 for new construction, where EA Credit 1 achievement is always an indicator of, almost always an indicator of the design for reducing operational energy costs. We also have information for existing buildings on Energy Star benchmark for those buildings. And so the way GBIG answers that question is to bring together different answers. And so to kind of summarize that back to you, there are dedicated data sets like GB data, and that's available within GBIG. There are blogs and related material on the National Academy study, and if you search on Dan Winters, his name, you'll find annotated bibliography of some of the most current information on green building costs. The final one I'll mention is, if you haven't seen it, and it may be of interest to this audience, is that we recently collaborated, and I don't think it has expression in GBIG this second, with C.B. Richard Ellis and Maastricht University to look at the adoption of LEED and Energy Star in 30 markets around the U.S. And that work included some basic information on rent and effective rent and so forth in different markets. And so if you haven't, this not directly related to the federal sector, but it does relate to the overall penetration of LEED and Energy Star in commercial office markets and other competitive real estate across the U.S. So if you haven't seen that, I would direct you to work by Nils Koch and his colleague Dave Pogue, and as part of the CBRE Real Green Research Challenge. That's some of the most hot off the presses information on that. So I'll just wrap that up by saying that the most relevant information for the federal sector is probably from last year's National Academy study.
Okay, that's one thing that's come up several times here within the headquarters of the Corps of Engineers for Army facilities about getting better ability to track real-time energy usage, sub-metering installations to the building level, and to be able to determine how well our new facilities are matching up with their energy models. Those of you out there on the engineering side of the house know that energy models are a tool to distinguish or estimate a preference for different systems. They can help you choose between A and B or B and C as different design options, but they don't really predict the future as to what your power bill is going to be. So we want to see how far off we are, how far the reality meets the models. Now, one thing there is a caveat to that. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to share that data with outside entities because of the security. If you are an adversary out there who will remain nameless, and you know or can find out our energy usage for different buildings associated with different military units, you could probably determine when they're there and when they've been deployed, and those kind of intelligence things that we don't want to share. So anyway, I have a follow-up question from a person that says, are all projects submitted for LEED certification or not will have data available through GBIG? I know you've already talked about how this pulls from multiple sources, but I guess it is LEED. Is it going to have the data available for the...
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll address both. Actually, that's a great question. So all projects are in here unless they opt out. There is certainly a vintage effect. Projects that were certified under certainly LEED version 2.1 typically have minimal online information that we probably know they exist, but we are very likely not to have complete information from them. Projects 2.2 and later. Now, any project can opt out. It can by declaring itself confidential. But for reference, there's two things about that. So obviously there are certainly, as you mentioned, there are national security issues that may compel a project to opt out, and we certainly respect those on multiple different levels. For projects at the same time, a project that elects to remain confidential will not appear in GBIG. It will just simply be invisible. It will be included in aggregate counts. So if you look at the activity in Washington, D.C., you would see a total count of buildings, both confidential and publicly disclosed, but there is no building page for a confidential project, and consequently there's no linkage between that project and any other. And obviously, per our policy, if if a building is declared essentially confidential or not listed, it is a building that we can neither confirm nor deny that it exists. So we have no comment on that building. And so that if folks wish to advertise a building like that, have a press release or do something like that, nominally it's against our terms of use to do that when one has declared it confidential. So that's a long answer to your question, which says, yes, they appear unless folks opt out, and if they opt out, then they can't. Then it's against our terms to use that information going forward.
Okay, I'll see if there are any more questions come in the queue. Otherwise, we'll be wrapping it up fairly soon. We've made really good time today, and I think we've covered a lot in the time that we did use today. So I don't see any other questions.
Can I add one?
Sure.
Can I add one last thing to your? I didn't quite. Just one. Just to wrap up on that issue of energy transparency. While respecting that national security issues are obviously paramount, in many cases, I think that it's worth asking: are there opportunities to make information at some aggregation over some time scale more readily available? And I think that one of the challenges for the federal sector is to keep up with its peers as we see greater effort on municipal disclosure. That information is, for instance, local government buildings across the country are on the vanguard of energy benchmarking. They're putting information out there in annual reports and showing that information. I would point to Arlington County, the AIR program, which is actually in GBIG and provides excellent information on energy intensity. And perhaps for non-mission critical facilities or non-security facilities such as offices or others where they're publicly accessible, it's worth some introspection about, are there parts of the federal estate that could use the tools that are being developed and advanced in the municipal government side, and see if we could play better together to create more continuity. That way we could answer more of these questions, such as building these timelines. We would love to build more timelines for federal facilities. Surprisingly, they're very challenging, and so we've had a great working relationship with the General Services Administration. And if you look up GSA in GBIG, you'll see over 150, 140 buildings in there, and we're able to help them create asset timelines. We'd love to do that for other agencies, even if it's only for a relatively limited subset of their assets. So just wanted to throw that out there, that that there's lots of new tools coming from the municipal sector that make it easier, faster, cheaper, and they've overcome many of the problems of privacy and aggregation. And so just worth a second look before thinking it's not for you.
Yes, no, I think that's great, and I think that we will have ability to make some inroads and help move the train forward. Like the federal government, basically, like anything, is a very long freight train. It doesn't turn on a dime. But I was on a committee, interagency committee with the White House's Council on Environmental Quality, looking at the guiding principles and how do we demonstrate compliance, because the current system is not very conducive to the way the federal government operates typically. What we want to move toward for part of it is to have a portfolio reporting, and we're focusing more on the aggregate and focusing more on the energy intensity. In other words, how many BTU per square foot by building type, so that we'll be able to track year over year the energy intensity of various buildings within our portfolio as an aggregate. And any adversaries out there wouldn't necessarily be able to distinguish how much of that aggregate was Fort Carson in Colorado, which does very well, versus some other forts that don't do so well, and or any particular unit. But that would show overall how we're doing, because the government, I was quite surprised when I came here from the Smithsonian, that the Army actually does have pretty high standard. We were at the time we were pursuing 30%, moving to 40% better than ASHRAE 90.1. And a lot of commercial enterprises in the private sector, they're doing good just to meet ASHRAE 90.1. So we have a pretty good scope on things. We did some studies through our construction engineering research lab in Illinois that showed that we could reduce energy consumption of buildings by improving the building envelope, such that we would then be able to put a smaller mechanical system in the project, so the end budget was actually cheaper than would have been otherwise. So there's no incremental cost, and of course, then to take it further, we would try to get to a point to incorporate everything that was life cycle cost effective. The government has the benefit in terms of these things of being a long-term owner. We don't just build a warm dark shell for a tenant to move into, but that's commercial enterprise, and we don't sell our buildings after 5 years. We tend to own and operate them for decades. And so if we can build an energy efficient building, we can look at the life of that building out 40 years and determine that, hey, you know what, in the long term, it'll benefit the taxpayer in a total cost basis for us to go ahead and include these features that'll lower that annual expense. And that gets a complicated issue in itself, but I think that there is a way that we can get the word out on how we are doing and interface with agencies and the industry in helping to advance our lessons learned. A copy of that building.
Oh, go
ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, that's an excellent, that saves everyone the burden of reading the National Academy report from last year, which I think you just paraphrased perfectly. It took the Academy a year and a half to reach the same conclusion you just laid out in 30 seconds. So I like that very much.
Oh, good. Well, I have not seen any more questions come in. So again, I guess I will sign off and tell you again, thank you very much. It's very informative. And I assume Sean is there still with you. And I hope to work with you guys in the future again. And I'll certainly get on the internet when I get home tonight and see what I can find out what's around.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Take care. Have a